Hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Thursday. It is the 10th day of July, 2025, and Iran, as well as the ceasefire hostage deal with Hamas, are the two stories that are in the headlines, so let's get right to them. First of all, from the Jerusalem Post, it is an interesting story. Enriched uranium remains at Iran's three nuclear sites, an Israeli official says. In other words, it hasn't been moved, it's still there. And of course, these are the sites that were bombed: Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. There's also a story from the Times of Israel. Israel will resume strikes on Iran with even greater force if needed, Israel Katz said. He's, of course, the defense minister, and again from the Times of Israel. And then from a website called the Media Line, after 12 days of war, Iran finds itself more isolated than ever. And boy, isn't that the truth? And we'll go into that a bit when we get to that story. And finally, Netanyahu to the hostage families. The goal after the 60-day truce is to end the war. And that's the ultimate goal. This is from YNET. So we got some really important stories as always. So let's get right to them. All right, headline number one: Enriched uranium remains at Iran's three nuclear sites. This is from an Israeli official by way of the Jerusalem Post. The official suggested that the Iranians might still be able to gain access to Isfahan, but it would be hard to remove any of the material there. Israeli intelligence indicated that Iran's enriched uranium remained at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, the sites that the U.S. hit last month, and had not been moved, an Israeli official told the international media on Thursday. The official suggested, however, that the Iranians might still be able to gain access to Isfahan, but it would be hard to remove any of the material there. On Tuesday, the head of France's Foreign Intelligence Service said that some of Iran's highly enriched uranium stocks had been destroyed by American and Israeli strikes, but there was no certainty about where the rest was now located. While Paris had indications of where Iran's highly enriched uranium stocks were, there would be no certainty until the United Nations atomic watchdog, that is the famous IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association, returned to the country. Now, it's unclear as the story goes on how much uranium was destroyed. Israeli officials told the Jerusalem Post in late June that although it is certain that Iran's storage facilities containing 400 kilos, that's about 900 pounds, by the way, of highly enriched uranium have been hit in the U.S. and the Israeli airstrikes, it's unclear how much uranium was destroyed or if Iran can access the uranium that was not damaged. These Israeli officials told the Jerusalem Post that they were almost certain that Iran was not able to remove the uranium from the nuclear enrichment facilities before or after the strikes. In other words, all evidence that we have says it's still there. It hadn't been moved. However, it remains impossible, of course, to be completely certain. Now, Iran will certainly try to remove any enriched uranium that they may have from these sites. However, with Israel watching them every moment, any attempt to remove would be met with Israeli firepower. Israel's not fooling around anymore. After the huge victory they had in the 12-day war, if they see the slightest movement from Iran about trying to enrich uranium or trying to move the enriched uranium from one of these three sites, they're going to get hit and get hit hard, as our second story indicates. This is from the Times of Israel. Israel will resume strikes on Iran with even greater force if needed. And this is from the defense minister, Israel Katz. Speaking at an Israeli Air Force pilots course graduation ceremony, Defense Minister Israel Katz threatens Iran. The graduation ceremony is a direct message to the dictator, Ali Khamenei, and the gang of Ayatollahs in Iran. Israel's long arm will reach you in Tehran, Tabriz, Isfahan, and anywhere from where you try to threaten and harm Israel, Katz says. There is no place where you can hide. If we need to return, we will return with even greater force, he says. Also at the ceremony, the IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, said the recent war in Iran was a moment in which we proved to ourselves and to the world that when the people of Israel are threatened, we know how to unite, how to act, and to strike with precision, power, and responsibility. And they certainly did. Israel thought they would do a good job, but their expectations were greatly found above and beyond anything they expected. In other words, they did such a fabulous job, incredible job in pinpointing their strikes against Iran. So they have shown the Middle East, they've shown Iran, and they've shown the world what they're capable of doing. And I like that: strike with precision, power, and responsibility. Air Force Chief Major General Tomar Bar, in his speech, said, "We bridged a challenge of 1,800 kilometers," and that's how far Iran is away from Israel, by the way, from a third circle country to a first circle country. I have no idea what he's talking about there, but the idea is they kind of got bombed back towards the Stone Age is the thrust of this, I think. He says the campaign is not over. It certainly isn't. We are prepared to act. So Israel is serious about attacking Iran again if they have the slightest provocation. They've been saying this over and over again. So we will wait and see what happens. Now, headline number three, this is from the website The Media Line. After 12 days of war, Iran finds itself even more isolated than ever. And this is so, so true. Tehran reels from new sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and internal unrest following the conflict with Israel. 12 days of military confrontation between Israel and Iran have brought Iran's internal fragilities into sharp focus. From a sweeping domestic crackdown to renewed international sanctions and mounting distrust between Tehran and the global institutions, the Islamic Republic now finds itself navigating one of the most critical diplomatic crossroads since the U.S. withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2018. In other words, they're finding themselves now in such a situation, there are no good answers for them. And like we said earlier, a couple things. Their leadership is non-existent. Their top leaders were taken out the first day of the 12-day war. So they're left with really the second string and below. So they don't have any real great leadership there in Iran, whether it be militarily or politically or scientifically for that matter. So they're really hurting big time. All right, so the article goes on to say the war, which saw Israeli strikes on military and nuclear targets within Iran, revealed not only security vulnerabilities, to say the least, but also exposed the regime to a new wave of international scrutiny. In response, the Islamic Republic has doubled down on domestic repression, expelling large numbers of Afghan refugees, interrogating minority communities, and detaining dozens on allegations of espionage or collaboration with Israeli intelligence. The government, aware of its security deficiencies and how easily it was infiltrated, responded with repression. That's all they know how to do. Again, we mentioned you probably got 30% at most of the people there in Iran which practice Islam. 70% do not. They're really not practicing Muslims. So as we talked about earlier today, in our first broadcast in breaking news, millions of Iranians are coming to faith in Jesus Christ. It's the fastest growing church in the world. So Islam is not at the top of the list of most Iranians. And add to this, only about 20% of the people in Iran are supportive of the government. That means 80% are not. So how do they deal with this? Well, of course, with the repression. The government, aware of its security deficiencies and how easily it was infiltrated, responded with repression. This is from Nima Bahili, an Iranian political analyst who told the Media Line. One tactic was the mass expulsion of Afghan refugees, possibly 300,000 or more. These deportations intensified after the conflict, suggesting an effort to reassert internal control, he added. Interrogations extended even to the members of the Jewish community. They avoided targeting Iranian Jews directly this time, but many were questioned, socially isolated for hours before being released. It caused panic. The regime understood the risk of provoking international reactions if it crossed a red line, Bahali noted. Meanwhile, the international community, particularly the United States and the European Union, has responded with sanctions aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear development and punishing human rights violations. Yet the nature and scope of these sanctions differ sharply between Washington and Brussels, reflecting divergent geopolitical philosophies. From the U.S. side, sanctions on Iran are among the most comprehensive in the world. These are divided into primary sanctions, which prohibit virtually all trade between U.S. persons, including citizens, companies, and entities operating under U.S. jurisdiction and Iran, and secondary sanctions, which penalize non-U.S. persons who engage with specific sectors of the Iranian economy. Now, the U.S. approach is all about isolation. That's what they're doing. As we've mentioned before, Israel is going full court press inside Iran, internally working with the various factions in Iran that want to see the overthrow of the government. They have had a number of operations. Like we said, so far, they will continue to destroying some of the infrastructure that's there with their nuclear and military program. There's targeted assassinations going on too. And so you're getting it from the U.S., the isolation, the financial withholding, making it financially impossible for countries that deal with Iran to do anything with the United States. So anyway, this is the U.S. approach. It's about isolation, Daniel Martin, partner and head of the sanction teams at HFW, a leading global law firm in the aerospace, commodities, construction, energy, insurance, and shipping sectors, told the media line that. So it's all about isolation. So summing up, Iran is in a very difficult spot right now with no relief in sight. Indeed, there continues to be operations taking place, like we said, within Iran to weaken the authority of the regime. It remains to be seen what will eventually happen, but we do know this from Scripture. Iran will remain an enemy of Israel. It will be part of the last days coalition that will attack. Led by Russia, of course, along with Turkey and other countries. But Iran will not be the leader. Iran will not be the major military power in the Middle East. They will not be a threat to Israel in the sense that by themselves they cannot really do anything, and certainly they cannot get a coalition together. What they've tried with the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah has miserably failed, and so we know how it's eventually going to turn out. In the meantime, we're going to see what takes place. It would be wonderful if there would be a new regime change. Reza Pahlavi, I saw an interview with him the other day. That's the eldest son of the late Shah. He's very well spoken, very well educated person. His dad, the Shah of Iran, was a lover of Israel. He was the one that in the 1973 war helped resupply Israel, that helped them win the Yom Kippur War. So his son, likewise, is a friend of Israel. But we will see if he ever gets back into power with a new regime there in Iran. Again, it's all about timing. What's going to happen? Again, in the short term, we don't know. All right, finally, Netanyahu to hostage families' goal after the 60-day truce is to end the war. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to return to Israel in the coming days after a 4-day visit to Washington with 2 meetings with U.S. President Donald Trump. However, the trip ended without a breakthrough in the negotiations for a ceasefire and hostage release deal in Gaza, despite officials claiming progress had been made in the talks. One group says progress, others stalemate. It's just the same old, basically, in these talks. Now, Netanyahu told a family of hostages who actually went to Washington to urge him to accept a deal that a comprehensive agreement to bring all the hostages home was not yet possible. He said, "We cannot do this now." He added that he and Trump have plans like this that cannot be disclosed and urged the families to be patient. Curious what those plans might be. We have no idea what's going to happen. Now, according to him, the release of the 10 living hostages and 18 bodies during the first 60 days of the deal is part of a process that will ultimately mean the end of the war and secure the release of the remaining hostages. That is their hope. That is the goal, he told the families. You need to be patient. Some among the families expressed concern that Netanyahu might once again be swayed by his far-right coalition partners and back away from some of the understandings reached in Washington. Mediators in Doha, and that's in Qatar, of course, where the negotiations are ongoing, are waiting the arrival of U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who they hope may help advance the talks. An Israeli official said on Thursday that a ceasefire in Gaza could be achieved within 1 to 2 weeks, but not within days. And again, this is contrary to what Donald Trump thought would happen. They thought they had an agreement in Netanyahu's trip, and now they're saying it could be 1 to 2 weeks, but certainly not within days. In a briefing to reporters, the senior official said both sides have agreed in principle to a 60-day truce, which Israel would use to work towards a permanent ceasefire. During that time, Hamas would be expected to disarm. If Hamas refuses, we will move towards military action. In other words, after 60 days, we'll try and get some deal. If no deal, we'll go back to fighting. In other words, the war would continue after the 60-day truce if it's over, if no deal is made. Now, Hamas is attempting to get something in writing that says Israel would not be able to restart the war after the 60-day truce. However, Israel, of course, would never agree to something like this. So we're going to have to wait to discover what's going to happen. And as always, we'll be here to give you the latest. We know where it's eventually going to end. That's the good news, being Bible-believing Christians, as we mentioned this morning. We know how everything's going to turn out. We know where the players are going to end up eventually, who's going to be on whose side and what's going to happen. In our book, look up a timeline of 50 Last Days events. We chronicle that for you. So if you haven't downloaded that book, please do, because as we mentioned, we added a new appendix, and that's about God's plan for for this world. Does he have a plan? He certainly does. And he tells us we can understand, we can know the plan, and we can know who the players are so we can anticipate what's going to happen. That's one of the great things about being a believer in Christ, because we are promised that those living in the last days, at the time of the end, the wise would be able to understand what's going on. And we certainly are understanding these things as they're taking place right now in front of our eyes. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.